Welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle. This is where two men in the middle of the country get together and talk about politics and current affairs. I'm Craig Huey.
And I'm Jason Peterson.
And apparently our third member of Two Men in the Middle, Brandon, he'll jump in at some point in time. His podcasting schedule got thrown off by a trip to Home Depot, apparently.
He'll come in and rescue us when we run out of stuff to talk about.
This does get harder when Brandon's not here, because I do rely on that a lot, that theory of if I just start saying stupid stuff, Brandon can
He'll clean it up,
bail me out.
Yeah.
And we were talking too. His minute pod that he did this week was really, really good. So we're gonna have to do those better if we're gonna hang with Brandon here.
That's a great point. That his pod was fantastic. If anybody hasn't listened to it yet, give it a check, because it'll educate you about the coming weeks and really the next month.
And it makes you feel better too. It makes you feel better about all of this craziness that we're in the middle of, that we're going to talk about. It does make you feel a little bit better in that there are these guardrails. They have held for 200 and some plus years. Yeah, it's been since 1873 that Rutherford B. Hayes went through this, but this isn't our first time through it. So it's a good overview, and it really helps people to kind of understand this is a process. This process has always worked. And despite it looking horrible, the process seems to be working again.
There's a script to follow for the next few weeks, and he even lays out the dates, and there's some comfort to be taken that we should follow this script, and things may turn out okay.
So let's get into this with, it feels like we are in absolute chaos right now. It feels like every institutional norm and process that in reality has held through this transition process, it just feels like the wheels are coming apart on the United States. In the middle of this pandemic and this election, it was important, I think, for me to let's do a podcast today. Some of it just to rant a little bit and just to get out what is happening. That the Texas lawsuit kind of took us to a whole new level. Now that that's been dismissed, JP, what's your overall thoughts just on just where we're at right now and where we're going?
I'm so frustrated and frankly scared. The polls show 65% of Republicans still think Trump won the election. And there's a huge communication gap there. People who are listening to Trump are believing him. People who are listening to McConnell are believing him. People who are listening to any of these other pundits that are saying the election's been stolen, there's been this mass fraud. I don't know how you counter that. There's just two different realities. And you made a good point that we're saying that the process was followed and all the court cases were thrown out and things are working. But at some level, I wonder if they are. When the other side doesn't concede, it just keeps dragging out, if in the public, if nothing else. And I don't know where that runs to, but I feel like we're seeing what happens when one party refuses to concede, what happens, and it just keeps dragging out. And until somebody does, I don't know where this goes, but it's going nowhere positive. It's completely depressing. I feel like we're seeing our democracy torn down around us, and half of the legislature doesn't care.
I agree with you that this is the week I went from irritated to afraid.
Yes.
And the genesis of that was the Texas lawsuit. And I could have dealt with the Texas lawsuit if that were the kind of the single thing that happened, because the lawsuit, as the Supreme Court's already ruled, is completely meritless. It's when I think 18 additional states signed on to that lawsuit. It's when 126 Republicans in Congress signed on to that lawsuit. It's when the president lets everybody know, I officially endorse this lawsuit. And to my knowledge, we didn't hear a peep out of the Republicans in the Senate. That's when we cross from, okay, this is a little bit of stagecraft from Trump to set himself up to what he wants to do next, where now the pillars of kind of the federalist Madisonian system that has held us together for so long is basically under attack. And the weirdest part is it's under attack by conservatives.
That's right.
And that's where I don't think people realize what that lawsuit tried to do and what the state of Texas was asking for in that lawsuit. It basically would devalue and delegitimize the entire federalist system. And maybe we need to talk a little bit. I just don't know if people understand what that means.
Well, up until now, it felt like You said theater. That's a good word. It felt like a political game. It felt like politics. Like
It's done.
this is just these guys behaving dumbly, and we're going to get through it. And now, to your point, this idea that Texas can say other states didn't elect correctly and influence the what's the word I'm looking for? The discrete power that a specific state has, the sovereignty of a state and their ability. That's the word I was looking. The ability that they have to control their own destiny. I mean, that is one piece. And then two, when the Supreme Court, who everybody aligns behind, is saying they're the law of the land and they'll make the final decision here, makes their decision. Now he writes about secession. And okay, if we can't play the game the way we want, we're going to leave. We're going to pick up our ball and go home. That's not how this United States works.
So I think to put this in perspective, let's say, Jason, I'm California and you're West Virginia. Under what the state of Texas is asking, it would become precedent now that I can say, Jason, as West Virginia, I don't like your environmental standards. They don't fit what we do in California. Therefore, I'm going to infringe on your sovereignty, which is a good word because states are semi-sovereign. So I'm going to impede on your sovereignty in West Virginia, and I'm going to sue to enforce California environmental law in West Virginia. That is as far apart from the federal government is an overarching entity, but all power is divested to whatever local level it can be divested to. That is so the opposite.
It's counter to some of their core principles. And that is one of the things that's scariest right now. If this party, the Republican Party, is giving up on some of their core principles, what's left?
And that's the question. Is that what we're seeing? Are we seeing the Republican Party realign or recalibrate their core principles?
It's a power grab. That's the only thing that's left. The only thing that they're aiming for now is power at all expense. And the means must justify the ends in their eyes because it's going to wreck what we see as normal government.
And here's what's weird. Consolidating power in the states is what keeps the Republican Party valid at this point in time. On a federal level, they're losing all kinds of elections. They have all kinds of demographic problems. It's the power in the states that keeps the Republicans relevant. And basically what they are arguing for a strong central federal government. And where I'm confused, I think what you just said too, is in one press conference, it's AOC is a socialist demon who is here to destroy the United States. And then in the second press conference, it's 17 Republican-led states have signed on to a lawsuit basically to destroy the federalist system. So I'm confused. Are they against socialists? Are they for authoritarianism? I just don't know what they're trying to present right now.
And doesn't it feel like there really isn't a strategy? It all comes down to this cult of personality of Trump, and nobody. The Republican Party is afraid of him. The Republican Party is afraid to operate without him right now. And so he is their de facto leader. They have rallied behind him through unbelievable chaos here and chosen to align their own ethics and morals behind this individual who the only thing he cares about is staying in power, people liking him, and money, I guess.
And you said something last week that I've been thinking about in regards to Trump and the Republican Party and kind of what all this is worth is that this is an opportunity for somebody to step into a leadership void left by Trump and the senior members of Republican leadership and take hold of this party. And the fact that nobody is capable or willing or even sees that as a viable play, I think this is again where what end game are the Republicans trying to execute on?
I don't know. And I'm glad you brought that up again, because opportunity is the right word. There are more Republicans voted in more elections this time around than ever before. They clearly have an opinion. There's very valid issues to debate. There's so much they could add to a platform and an agenda to change behind that the folks that voted them in would want to follow. And That's not even being discussed.
They're missing. They had a great November 3rd election. They actually expanded their base, which everybody thought was impossible. They should be taking multiple victory laps, but instead they've decided to go down this rabbit hole with Trump that leads to what? Trump forming his own version of the United States?
It feels like they could have legitimately attempt to influence Biden and his administration to place people that are aligned with their ideals, to place people who think through the issues that they're concerned about. If these things were vocalized and you had a real leader out front, suggesting this is an agenda that a huge amount of Americans voted for. We think it's important. There's people down ballot who are elected behind it. Hey, Mr. Biden, hey, Democrats that are, have won the House, put this in the debate, put this in the mix. But that conversation's not happening. That's not covered in the news. That's not covered in the media. You don't hear anybody talking about the things they want to accomplish in the future. Who's looking forward here? Who's looking ahead? That doesn't seem to be happening at all. It's all about who gets elected in January 20th. What happens after that?
This group of Republicans has no governing agenda. They have no governing philosophy. They don't want to grab the reins of governmental power to do something. I think they just want to grab the reins of power. And you see this when Republicans have all three branches of government. Legislation and governing is not really what they do, not what they really want to do under this current iteration of the Republican Party. They're way more about regulation and the judicial branch, way more than they are developing some sort of legislative agenda that has an impact on the country. There's a couple things that people keep saying that are defending this that I can't really wrap my brain around. One is they just want all legal votes counted. And I think what the base of that really means is we want all mail ballots thrown out. Mail ballots are not legal.
Well, I mean, the more pessimistic version of that is it's any ballots that don't align with their candidates, which in this case we're suggesting might be a bunch of the mail-in ballots, which is a joke because this year with a pandemic, there are so many people with very legitimate reasons to vote remotely. And that by all measures that I've seen was fair, was successful, was legitimate, was accurate. But okay, so if you throw out all the mail-in ballots, you don't do that after that you've already authorized it. You don't do it after you've already said this is a legitimate way to vote. And you can't rewrite history when it's done because you didn't like the way it came out.
And Texas did the same thing they're suing Pennsylvania over. On the fly, they basically changed their voting rules to accommodate the pandemic. It's the exact same thing.
So, Brandon, you used the word off-ramp before, suggesting what's the off-ramp coming up. And in the past few episodes, we've discussed different ways that might happen. Do you share my fear now that there aren't any off-ramps? This train is on this track and it's a bullet train. It's going fast and we don't know what the destination is, but there's no way to slow it down. There's no way to change course. There's no way to go down that off-ramp. It's just like we're heading towards some, I don't know, destruction, and we can all see it, but we can't do anything about it.
Well, yes, I agree. I think that, there is no off-ramp at this point because that train has passed. That ship has sailed, and the narrative has solidified among the Trump base already that the election was fraudulent and stolen, and we've already had more than half the Republican caucus agree to overturn and delegitimize a lawful election. So even if you have a majority of the Republicans in Congress decide to accept Biden as the winner now, it doesn't change the damage that's already been done. And you can't undo this. The genie is out of the bottle. And so Republicans are going to be grappling with an electorate that is radicalized, that is fired up, that believes this was stolen, that is talking about succession now and what they can do to rebel and to convey that they don't believe that Biden is legitimate. So there isn't any going back, and the problem is that Republicans are going to continue to be judged by how loyal they are to Trump, and enough Republicans are willing to meet that litmus test any way possible. So I don't see things changing. It's a conundrum for President-elect Biden because he actually has to work with many of these colleagues, 126 who have been willing to overturn his victory. And so that's why the Georgia elections are so critical on the Senate side, to being able to bypass as much of the intransience by elected Republicans as possible. But there is no turning back. I think that we're in this mess. It's not going to get better sooner. So it's a very dark outlook, but I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel.
What'd you get at Home Depot, Brandon? Brandon's joined us.
Light bulbs. So yeah, nothing exciting.
Yeah,
shopping for light bulbs and changing those.
Did you get those like swirly kind, the incandescent ones, or the ones that use less energy?
I did. I've been not migrating to those one by one. So I'm kind of at the point where almost every bulb in the house is now that type. So yeah.
So, Craig, I should credit you with the off-ramp phrase because I think we were using it before, and I was thinking of your part of that conversation and looking at Brandon. So, we should give you the opportunity to answer as well. Do you think there's an off-ramp here, or what happens? We've all tried to speculate before. Has your opinion changed?
I think that's why, like we said earlier, I've moved over from the aggravated to the scared column. Because I don't see where the off ramp is. That there are certain things that once you cross, I don't know how you come back, and it feels like we are danger close to that right now.
This has a ripple effect too, because one of the pieces we were talking about before the mics went on was that the Republican Party in general doesn't seem to be very forward thinking here. If let's say in the best case scenario, this whole process this wrench that they've thrown in this process is successful, Trump somehow stays in power, they win the Senate, like the stars all align and they're in complete power right now. There is a day in the future on an infinite time scale when Democrats are back in power in all branches. And it's going to be chaos because these same tactics that were used could come back. And it seems pretty short-sighted not to consider the fact that if they want to change how elections occur and how governing occurs, that might not blow up in their face in the future. And that's not thought through by them either, I guess.
Well, and Jason, I would say to your point, you reap what you sow, but I think many of them know that, and they know that the long-term trends demographically, despite what we've seen over the past couple of election cycles, are working against them. They see the writing on the wall. So this has all been about trying to consolidate as many short-term gains as possible, especially when it comes legally to the courts, because they know that their time is limited. And so it's not about not thinking through the future. I think they understand that. And so it's about they're prepared for that. And so it's just about do whatever they can do in the meantime by any way possible.
Interesting.
Regardless of the impact and the damage it does to the Republic.
Maybe since you're the closest thing we have to a Republican here, and I don't even know, I don't think that term as the Republican Party certainly doesn't apply to you. But what do you want as a Republican? What at the end of this, what does success look like for the Republicans? Tearing the Constitution apart? What? Tell me what success looks like if you're Ted Cruz, Mark Rubio, Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, Democratic or Republican governors. What do you want?
Well, I should preface this again by saying this, the closest thing to Republican, and I do not identify or I find any of this relatable, and it's alien to me, and this mindset is completely foreign that Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and the rest of the majority of the elected Republicans seem to have. So that being said, and the fact that I found myself outside of this frame of reference and thought process. I think that it's just about political survival, relevance, and trying to keep that relevance for as long as possible. But people like Josh Hawley, in particular, and Rubio, they have long-term ambitions to run for president. So they feel like they have to play this out as long as possible to be the heir apparent to Trump so that they can get to the White House. And they don't see any other path to the White House without placating Trump's base and being as Trumpian as need be to get to where they want to go. So it's political calculus.
Do you think Republicans genuinely want 4 more years of Donald Trump as their president?
No, I think many of them will tell you behind closed doors they do not, and so they cannot reconcile their desire to stay into office and to have relevance with the fact that they cannot stand Trump, and those two are at odds. And so they are trying to find a path where they continue to have power and stay in office, placating Trump, and that's what it comes down to. And they will acknowledge that privately, but never publicly.
And I think, Jason, hey, helping Trump set up Trump TV. Okay, that made sense, I guess. I mean, as his way out the door, he's setting up his media company. Oh, okay. Dealing a blow to mail-in ballots, that made sense because mail-in ballots are going to make it harder for Republicans to win national elections. I could have ridden with these are the two outcomes and objectives we're trying, but we're way past that, aren't we? I mean, we're well past we're doing this for what's next for Trump or to make sure Republicans don't have to deal with mass scale mail-in balloting.
Yeah. I don't even know how to respond to it. There's no strategy. There's no cohesiveness. It's all reactive. It's all a play to stay in power. And I don't know, Craig. I'm out of ideas and I'm so frustrated and I'm so upset that I can't even predict what's going to happen next. And I almost don't want to read the news. It's so depressing.
Is it fair to say that as Democrats, if we're socialist, is it fair to say Republicans are now anarchist and anti-federalist?
That's really interesting. I mean,
the Republican Party just mounted one of the most serious challenges to federalism that's ever occurred in the United States.
Well, it's not only anti-federalist. I think that's a given by default. But I think you can also claim that they're semi-authoritarian or semi-autocratic with this line of reasoning. Because if you take it all the way to the ends that it would go, you would have millions of people disenfranchised and an entire national election overturned. That's not sustainable in a democracy. You don't have a democracy at that point. So if you're willing to sign on to it, even if cynically you think the court will have your back and overturn it, like that's not a responsible position, and that's not a position that you can take and still claim that you are for federalism, that you're for Republican small r ideals or Democratic small d principles, because you're not at that point. You believe in something else, but it's not democracy, and it's not the representative republic that we know and love.
Why is the language around saving the Constitution coming out of that Texas Secretary of State guy then? Because to me, this is all counter to being a constitutionalist.
Oh, it's completely antithetical to what's outlined in the Constitution. It's ironic because part of the argument, if you go back many election cycles that Republicans have used over and over again, has been that we have 50 state elections, which we do, and each of those states has its own rules, its own laws, its own guidelines for how those elections are conducted and carried out. And that's a hallmark of our system. And that's why Republicans would argue that, when they argue for voter ID, when they argue for strict initiatives in places like Texas and Florida, they do so on the basis of we have a federalist system and each state should be able to create its own rules. And then they completely argue the opposite in this case. And so it's antithetical to the principles they espouse all the way up until this point. And so constitutionally, they may be trying to somehow, thread together an argument to use the Equal Protection Clause as the basis. But it really doesn't hold up here because there is no equal protection when you're disenfranchising millions of voters based on rules and laws changing in the course of a pandemic. Um, because if they were even had a threat of consistency, the argument still wouldn't hold up. But if they had a threat of consistency, they would have objected to results in all of the states that also changed their laws in the course of this pandemic, including rock-ribbed Republican states. They did not, because this is a cynical ploy. They cherry-picked the 4 states that were battleground states that Biden took from Trump from 2016, because all they care about is overturning the results. And they started with the result they wanted to go to, Trump staying in power, and then they worked backwards into an argument that they could try to make to allow that. But it doesn't hold up. And the Supreme Court found that it didn't hold up.
In some way, the only thing I wish the court would have granted a hearing, because I wish they would have got Ted Cruz in front of them and said, "Let's have it, Ted. You were the dog catching the car, or chasing the car. You've officially caught it. You have to stand in front of the Supreme Court and make your argument." Because I would have loved to hear what they would have come up to justify this.
I agree, and I would have guaranteed you, because they basically said Texas had no standing, and so the case itself was rejected 9-0, but 7-2 was the breakdown for the justices who dissented, who thought that it should at least be heard. But even among those 2, which were Alito and Thomas, Alito made clear that even though he thought it should be heard, because procedurally he didn't think they could just reject it out of hand, he didn't buy into the merit. So I think based on that insight that we would have had a shutdown of this case if it had been heard at least 8-1, if not 9-0.
Do you think that would have been a more powerful message than the 3-sentence rejection? We're not even going to hear it or whatever.
Well, yes, because you would have had multiple justices on record and very scathing opinions shooting it down. And I think justices across the spectrum, including those that Trump most recently appointed. Mm-hmm. So there would have been some, I think, value in being able to have, especially the 3 he appointed, really shoot down the legal argument here. And it would have been something that I think would have, put Trump supporters kind of in a difficult position of then reconciling that with the fact that, their biggest support of Trump had been for justices, and Trump himself believed that he would appoint justices who would uphold his victory. I mean, if you go back to his rationale for appointing Amy Coney Barrett, has been that we need 9 justices on the court to settle an election dispute, presumably to settle one in my favor, if you're going to read into that.
Yeah. So JP, one of the things, too, that a lot of people have talked about during these protests, or a lot of people just on Trump's side, is that they need their day in court. I don't understand this, because they've been to court 52 times. They've lost 51 times.
That's right.
What are we missing in that people are not understanding that this whole process has been really in court? Any meaningful thing that's happened, it's happened in a court.
You're pulling the same thread I wanted to pull, which is let's refer to as the man in the street. All right. So we just said that if the Supreme Court had heard it and we saw this case play out, we get such a stronger ruling that would somehow resonate with people. And I actually disagree with that, because I think we're reading the news. People are listening to this podcast who are presumably paying more attention than the average Joe, but I don't think the man on the street is. I don't think that this case being heard and a big court decision coming out and it being 8 people dismissing it and this covered in the news is heard by enough average citizens. And so the fundamental thing here, this 2-reality view, is there's some sort of communication gap, or there's some sort of publishing gap or something where people are only hearing what Trump says, or they're only hearing whatever Republican legislator they hear says. And so they're ignoring everything else. Otherwise, we wouldn't be debating facts at this point.
So how can information penetrate that bubble? Because I agree with you that there's a group of people that have just, through the news they consume, the websites they visit, the podcast, whatever it is,
it's not
they're
niche.
just in an echo chamber.
It's a huge number of people too, and that's one of the scariest things. And how do you reach them? I don't know. But we've talked about all these different social networks, and it's getting worse. It's not getting better, right? So I don't see this problem solving itself, and I don't see it being influenced by the Supreme Court, or at this point, even a really great articulate leader getting in front of the news cameras, because it's being ignored currently.
I would argue the Supreme Court hearing it and having opinions that would be very strong, it wouldn't change the course of the Trump supporters' opinions on this, but it would have, I think, historical relevance to be able to look back upon and say, not only was this a crazy, bizarre case that was unhinged, like it was unsound and dangerous, and so we would have the opinions of the justices to back that up. As to what will actually change minds and hearts, I mean, this is self-imposed communication gap. We know from experience that these individuals who hold on to every word that the president says, they can't be persuaded otherwise. They have, many of them left Facebook for Parler because they didn't want to hear other points of view. They didn't want to be bothered with other perspectives. They want to live in a silo. So I think we have to be, I think, truthful and speak to the fact that, this isn't an issue where they're just not being reached. I think in many cases they don't want to be reached. So what changes that? It only changes when Trump goes away, when he's no longer a factor in American politics, or when you have enough leadership in the Republican Party that's able to marginalize him and sideline him to be able to move on. And then over time, his supporters, just basically kind of exist in a vacuum and they don't have a movement behind them.
So maybe Trump being gone is the answer, and unfortunately, that's not going to be for the foreseeable future, if not many years.
You just used a term, Brandon, self-imposed communication gap. I'm going to steal that when I'm not talking to you and brand that as my own, because I think that said that very well. For some reason, we as citizens of the United States, we've decided to impose a communications blackout on things that we just don't want to hear or just don't fit our personal narrative. And if that continues, how does anything change? And I guess too, my final thoughts on this are, so when Trump came out and signed an executive order about patriotic teaching in school. Remember that one, Brandon? You and I did a pod, and we roundly made fun of that as, what in the world? Is that what's required? I mean, is this just is part of the solution that we need to go back to just good old fashioned civics classes in junior high and high school, and we start talking about terms of what does capitalism mean? What does socialism mean? What does communism mean? How is the United States set up? We're not a democracy, we're a republic. What does that mean? Do we need to launch some sort of just massive re-education project in the United States?
Everybody needs to go back to their U.S. History 101 class and their American Politics 101, American Government 101.
Right. Partially because these terms are just bandied about so flippantly and without any context or nod to the actual definitions. It gets frustrating, right? Because I particularly the socialism term, because people use that to oppose anything that they disagree with now. If we're having to wear masks, socialism, public health guidelines, socialist. So it is just a complete misunderstanding. And partially that's due to our politicians, right? Because they use those terms liberally and too frequently. And so they get adopted by the public. And then there's just a lack of context and knowledge about what really is socialism, what really is capitalism. What are we in terms of our economy, which we actually have a mixed economy, and nobody probably knows even what that is or what that actually means, having, elements of both. But I think it's civics. And think about it. If in high school, you take probably a semester of American government, usually at most, if you take honors AP courses, you may take a year, and then half of that year is spent in comparative government. So I think we need to really kind of double down on civics because it is something we lack. And it's embarrassing that more people around the world know more about our system and our constitution than we do in many cases.
That's a
When
great
you see
point.
the citizenship test, they're actually there was a big change. They're adding questions. They're making it harder. But if you looked at the questions, I guarantee you most Americans would have get like 50% on it.
Yeah.
They just wouldn't.
I mean, I don't mean to go all old man whitey here, but if you can take a gender studies test, you can take a United States civics class.
Why
If
do
you
you
can
guys
take a
think
class in gender studies and gender theory, you can certainly take one on how the United States government actually functions. I don't think that's too big of an ask.
why don't you think we do that earlier? Why isn't a civics class taught in elementary school?
So
It should be considered that important, right?
It should.
I've like totally dismissed this whole, anti-woke thing as just a bunch of kind of BS. Maybe we just need to go back to how much of this are we not teaching people? And is there a reason why we're not teaching people?
Well, and I don't want to, mischaracterize this, but we know that as far as learning goes, the earlier in life that you can learn some of these concepts, the quicker you are to internalize them and to adopt them. And so the fact is that's why it's easier to learn a language the younger you are than the older you get. So we should be teaching it at a younger age in elementary and middle school. The problem with waiting until high school is that you reach an age, especially it's a very complex time, for I think young people, and you don't have their attention spans, and it's not long enough for them to internalize it, and it's too brief. It should start in elementary school and continue into middle and high school, and so that's a failing. I think that it's really just an issue of we've always done it this way, and we've never changed, and it's time to rethink education.
Is that whole we're all Americans and in this together? That just feels like silly, cliche, dumbness. At this point, I would make fun of somebody for saying that phrase, but Jason,
from a bygone era in some ways, it feels like.
Is that just me being longing for an era that doesn't exist? Is there any path back to that, or is this just how we are moving forward?
I wish it was pessimistic, Craig, but I don't think it is. I think that's reality. I don't detect any unity down the street, let alone across the country. And, as long as the kind of debate we see right here about who even wins the election, even if there's a 7 million vote difference, I mean, this doesn't get better. And play that out for a second. If this fight goes on through January and potentially past, I think about what if the scenario were reversed? What if Republicans won by over 7 million votes and Democrats were creating all these legal cases to try to overthrow it and dismissing the Constitution? You'd probably have armed people on the steps of the Capitol, and so if that kind of mentality exists, is that in our future?
Brandon, first off, your minute podcast this week was excellent. That was really, really, really good. Jason and I have already said if we're going to make more of those, we're going to have to up our game because what you did was really, really excellent. And what I liked about it is it gave me a sense of confidence while I was listening to it of, all right, this is a giant turd storm, but we're going to get through it because the norms have held, they'll continue to hold, and we'll come out the other side of this. While I believe that's true, Trump's not over. Is his next play on Monday, I believe the 14th, is when folks get together in Congress the Electoral College actually gets together.
Electoral College.
What kind of shenanigans are we in for this week with the Electoral College?
Well, so really not any, because the Electoral College voting process really can't be disrupted by any outside elements. And again, this is outlined in law. So the Electoral College Act of 1887, which was enacted in response to the 1876 presidential election and the chaos that ensued between Hayes and Tilden in that race, it caused Congress, this would never happen today, right? Because Congress can't get together and come to agreement on anything. But back then they said, we don't want to ever see this happen again. So they were very meticulous in outlining the processes and procedures for Electoral College voting and electoral college vote canvassing and counting all the way up to inauguration day. So Monday, you basically have electoral college meeting in each of the 50 state capitals in the District of Columbia. And, depending on the state, it's either the Secretary of State or the governor who presides over that. But that process is very firmed up. I mean, those votes, each of the electors comes forward, announces who they're voting for. It's a very standard process. There are certificates that are assigned and then mailed off to the president of the Senate, who's Vice President Mike Pence. There's copies that are sent to the archivist at the Capitol in D.C. There really is an opportunity. You can't hear objections in these state voting processes. That doesn't exist. There can't be point of order or attempts to not have it occur. Like there just doesn't exist a mechanism to stop it. The only thing that can happen, as I mentioned, is you could have, faithless electors. That occurs so infrequently, though, so that's not likely to be an issue. So there's really nothing that can happen Monday. I mean, this is really kind of a formalized procedure with no ingrained hearings or areas where objections can be entertained.
And I think that's one thing that I've been surprised to learn of how much law is wrapped around this. There's really not as much wiggle room as people think.
Yeah, the only area where there can be, again, objections entertained is when this gets to Congress and on January 6th, because when the certificates are mailed, those technically are the votes, and then Congress, the vice president opens them up, reads them aloud, and Congress technically is counting those votes, at their January 6th meeting. And so that's when objections can be entertained for members of the House and Senate. But if an objection is entertained, there has to be a senator who signs on as well as a House member, or it can't be read. And, then if that objection, for it to stand, it has to get a majority vote by both the House and the Senate. So
And it's just there to read stuff. He has
he cannot interfere. He cannot shut anything down. Yep, he is just there to actually read aloud the votes, because the task is assigned to Congress to actually count those votes, and Congress can't decide not to count them. They can entertain objections, but they can't stop the process. Every objection that is entertained has to be voted on, and then once those objections are up, the vote stands and it's over. And so the only way for there to be interference is for a congressional objection to get a majority of the House and the Senate, which is not going to occur based on the numbers.
I hope it all plays out like that, Brandon. Maybe I'm pessimistic, but that sounds so formal and so following law that it sounds beautiful. It's music to my ears, and I don't have faith that it can go like that. There's just
isn't it fascinating, guys? Like most people don't even know like the details of that process, right? Like even if you've gone through civics courses, like most people take it for granted because it is so formal and so dry, and because there really isn't any opportunity to disrupt it. So most people don't know the formality, and they're trying to brush up and read it this year. But the fact of the matter is, if you go back to the last contested election we had in the year 2000, there wasn't any surprises after that vote certification. It went very smoothly because there isn't really any other opportunity there. I mean, without acting illegally. Now, I can't tell you that somebody might not try to do something illegal, but that would be shut down fairly quickly, because why would you take that risk? Because it would go to the Supreme Court, and it would just be shut down, because it's so enshrined into law, and you can read the act itself. There just isn't any opportunity there.
Yeah. I hope the rest of it. I hope this next this week coming up is just boring and procedure, and that's it. But I just don't think that's going to happen.
And that's why, Craig and Jason, the strategy by the Trump team all along was to inundate the courts, I should say, with as many lawsuits as possible up to the certification deadline, because they also know they're not complete dummies. They know that once certification happens, the process is so internalized and so formalized, there isn't really any opportunity to change the outcome. And we reached certification this past week in all 50 states. So that was their goal, was to stop certification and to inject, and that's really too, legislatures can't act now. Their only ability to act is prior to certification. So any of these state legislators that would be willing to take up a measure on behalf of Trump, like their time is gone.
Yeah. Hey, but Jason, at least the United States legislators are continuing to work, and the Senate's functioning, and COVID relief is on its way, and at least the government is continuing to function through all this, right?
Right. That's actually depressing too, because there seems to be there was great news the last couple of weeks that that both sides of Congress were inching towards some sort of COVID relief bill. And, I know Democrats wouldn't get as much as they wanted, and Republicans didn't want too much to go to bail out the states. It seemed like there would be compromise here and get something out that nobody was particularly happy with, but it was successful because it got passed. And now we find out once again, one man out of the 350 million in the country can stop the government from functioning. And this isn't the first time he's done it. And yet again, I wonder, and Brandon told us earlier, I guess Republicans know that someday Democrats will be in that same position and wield that same power, and they don't care. So they're going to try to hold on to it as long as they can. For all the ink that is spilled on Trump, boy, McConnell.
And he's doing this to protect businesses from getting sued over COVID. My understanding, that's his big piece that he needs to make sure is in this piece of legislation. And he's willing to keep money from people that actually need it to make sure that is in this legislation. Brandon, is there anything to McConnell's resistance to this other than just basically wanting to bake in some things that protect businesses? That's the only thing that I can come up with, that he's really saying, hey, I will not move forward unless this is addressed.
Yeah, that's the one sticking point in the legislation. That's been a sticking point for months now. And the inability of McConnell to go beyond that, which is interesting because I don't get the sense that that's the sticking point for other Republicans and Senate or House leadership, but it is for McConnell. But at the same time, I can't help but wonder if there's be more cynical about this and wonder if there's other ulterior motives at play. If McConnell can draw this out prior to the Georgia runoffs too, it I think probably helps Republicans because they can lobby blame on the Democrats. And there's also a side of me that wonders if he's trying to politically kneecap Biden by drawing this out as well, because it keeps Biden from being able to be successful on day one if we go this long without any type of relief.
And let's throw around enough cynicism for everybody. I really liked when Pelosi came out this week and said, yeah, we could have done this during Trump was president, but we just didn't want to. We just figured we'd wait till the new president got in.
And I do think, and I'm not impressed either, because I think that the Democrats as well have gone back and forth. There were opportunities where the numbers were close, and the Democrats rebuffed that. And I think there was some politics at play there before the election, because in that case, I think it probably helped Democrats. If they handed Trump a victory before the election, they didn't want him to run and use that. So both sides have played politics to a degree, but right now, we're seeing that play out more on the Republican side. And it's frustrating because it's with something so critical. And this may have already been discussed, but, there's so much in that COVID relief bill, but people also forget that the funds for vaccine distribution are included in there, and the funds for the public health departments around the country to be able to roll this out. The vaccine is great, and we have the approval now, and we're getting a timeline in place. But if we don't have the funding to handle distribution, it's going to just extend out the process, and it's going to be a slower return to normal than we think.
Well, those are supposed to start rolling off the trucks Sunday night, right? I read how all this infrastructure has been built for refrigerating this vaccine. That's got to be kept at like minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit, and they've got to ship it through planes, trains, and automobiles, and keep it cold through that entire pipeline. So that's really interesting about the funding for that. If the work as a project manager to distribute those across the country is already in place, and it's supposed to be happening Sunday, Monday timeframe. If any of that's held up by it, that's devastating.
So maybe it's just my conspiracy brain kicking in, but I think what I just pieced together is that in the next 2 weeks, in the middle of all of this we're going through in the transition, Trump is going to order the military to have boots on the ground all over the United States to distribute this virus. That seems really strange to me. I don't know why that just popped in my head, but it's like, wait a minute. To your point, Brandon, they're going to fund this. The military is going to be the primary arm to distribute it. And in the middle of what's happening, where we're having almost this existential fight about the democracy, Trump's going to order military troops all over the United States.
The optics of that aren't great, are they?
No. My fear factor just went up considerably.
Yeah, I mean that is concerning, and I will admit I don't know the kind of extent of what that rollout looks like and how the military is going to be utilized. There would be, I think, a role for like National Guard to play in distribution, particularly in rural areas of the country. But if you were talking about an outsized role for the military throughout the country, that's alarming. I think it remains to be seen, like many things, how that's going to occur.
Yeah. It just seems like, Jason, we're playing a dangerous game here. I know for me personally, coming off of 9 months of quarantine, I've about had enough of everything. The mood is frayed, nerves are shot right in the middle of this threat now that we're trying to work through. We've got to get this vaccine spread out. It just feels like there's a lot of things happening that it wouldn't take much for this to get really off the rails.
There's so much tension. The closest I can compare to is like right before the year 2000, when there was a big section of the country that thought all of our infrastructure was going to melt down because the year flipped over, and that was like a technical thing, not a philosophical thing, not a core political faith or belief. Buckled in with health and genuine fear of your life.
Well, and this is so complex. If you think about it, we cannot overstate how massive an undertaking this is to roll out a vaccine, likely to be 2 vaccines, because the FDA is hearing next week on the Moderna vaccine, which will likely get approved. So we'll have 2 vaccines that are approved, one that requires storage and super cold temperatures. The other does not, which is great because that means that one will go to like CVS and Walgreens and places like that. But this isn't something that you can just do. You need to have the infrastructure in place. You need to have the public health authorities. You need to have directives. And we have gone through the last 9 months, in a chaotic manner without the necessary infrastructure in place intentionally, because Trump did not want those communication posts in place. He did not want, a team. I mean, he until recently had not even spoken for weeks with his pandemic response team. So there's a lack of coordination and logistics already. So all of that has to be ramped up at a time when it's been dormant. And that's what's scary. Now, I think when Biden gets in there, that will be one of the first things he does is to, immediately put those pieces back together. But that takes time as well. And especially when it's been broken, it's like trying to put a very complex puzzle together and racing against the clock. That's what we're up against.
Well, and no one would argue against having elderly people in care facilities, that kind of thing, frontline nurses and doctors getting the vaccine first. But when we hear about the problems of distribution and the infrastructure required to set this up, and now the money to distribute it too, it seems like the date where you and I might get it gets pushed out further and further. So as we enter this long, dark winter of continuing to work from home and wondering what is it like to return to normal for work and restaurants and all the things that, we probably look forward to happening in the spring, it doesn't seem like that's going to be timed well.
Yeah, my wife turns 50 in March, and we were planning on being in Europe for that. That still might be a little bit too aggressive.
My wife turns 50 next November, and we were planning to be in Europe for that too. And I hope it's
Okay,
done by then. Yeah.
If it's November 2021 and you guys can't travel to Europe, things have gone horribly wrong.
Has anything gone really right this year, Brand?
I mean, maybe that's the best way to look at it. Instead of saying things have gone wrong, the continuation of nothing going right continues.
Yeah.
I want to be optimistic, though. I think we can get our act together and we can get to a point where, outside of those most at risk, that the rest of us will be inoculated, in the April-May timeframe. And so we'll be back to normal then. And partially, I believe that because, number one, we're going to have a change in administration, and they're going to have their work cut out for them, but they're going to be willing to do it, unlike the current administration. I mean, there has been no desire to really prioritize this. I mean, it hasn't been a priority because, everything political has been prioritized before this. So I do have confidence. We're going to, struggle until I think January 20th, but we're going to get to a good place. It is kind of frustrating though, because I think, you already have in the UK, regular people being vaccinated. So it's more, and I'm watching that and again, it shouldn't take us that long, but there's so much that needs to be put back together again. But I am confident that, April, May, we'll start to see things come together and then kind of work towards kind of early summer.
To put it back together again, Jason, you said something that when you're talking about McConnell and talking about the negotiation for the COVID relief, you said not everybody's going to get everything they want. And I kind of honed in on that because the whole system is based off that one line that you just said. The whole idea of governing, if you're not going to have a monarch, then that's the core principle. You have to understand, I have to give to get something, and the whole thing is based on compromise. And if that goes away, you can't have a democracy.
Yeah.
And it feels like, and I keep going back to younger people. We all work in tech. It's a young crowd. As a concept, people don't gravitate to that anymore. Can that be, how do we reintroduce that back into the culture altogether? This whole concept is you're not going to get what you want. You're going to get something that might work for you, and you got to work your way through it.
I think it requires a little bit of embracing the positive side of the melting pot that we've always traditionally looked at the U.S. for. We're entrepreneurial. We reach for the stars, and we embrace all the different ideas that have come into the country over the years. And I'm not just talking about immigration. I'm talking about there is a lot of diversity amongst Americans, and that's what makes us special. And that's why it's so hard to pin down what your traditional American looks like. And therefore you have to be willing to compromise, because that diversity brings an inherent difference of opinion. And the positive side of that is those different opinions bring different solutions to the problems. It allows us to think differently. And I think people only look at the differences in a negative light right now. They only look at, is my job gone? Has my education changed? Is the makeup of what I think of my view of culture changing? And they lose sight of what that diversity actually brings. And if you can accept the fact that we're a diverse public, then you require compromise.
Yeah. Brendan, I saw the President of the United States in his rally last Saturday in Georgia tell the entire crowd that they were victims, all of them. That the government, the deep state, the Democrats, pick whoever you like, that they have been wronged by a list of people. How do Republicans flush that out of their system when Trump's gone? Because that's like the most anti-Republican Party thing I've ever heard. And how do politics in general, specific to the Republicans right now, let loose of that kind of drug? Because that's such a powerful thing to say. People are going to gravitate to you. You're going to reinforce that bubble that they're in. How do we stop doing that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because it was the Republicans until the Trump era that had criticized the Democrats for fostering the politics of resentment and identity politics and victimhood. And now they have taken that baton and said, well, they've basically said, hold my beer, and they've gone, completely off the cliff with it. So I'm not surprised at all that Trump continues to do it because it's the only way that he can assemble a coalition. It's the way he won in 2016. It didn't work out for him this year. But it's the way that he can continue to rally people to him and to have relevance and to raise money. So he will continue down that path, but it's not sustainable for Republicans in the long term. It's not a message that resonates with young people. It doesn't resonate long term, with minorities, and so it doesn't have staying power. It only works with a certain segment of the electorate, and eventually it wears off. Like it's not something that people will continue to come back to time and time again. So, Republicans, I think, they have to square that with, their principles. I mean, you can't claim that you're a party that values the individual and, and individual initiative and drive to succeed in entrepreneurship and all of those themes and concepts that are central to the party platform, and then tell entire swaths of the population that you're victimized, the establishment is against you, we need to rise up. It's not congruent. So the only way that they can, I think, untangle it is moving beyond Trump and actually working collaboratively on major legislation and getting past the gridlock that exists. Because
right.
At some point too, you have
they're not going to, as long as Trump's in power, the Republican Party, they're not giving that plaque up.
No, again, just like many of these things, it's getting beyond Trump. So you have to get beyond the Trump era for that to go by the wayside, because a lot of this is based on populism, and you have politicians like Josh Hawley that are trying to take up that populist mantle, and so and appeal to those voters and speak in that language of resentment and victimhood, because they see it as a path to winning. So it doesn't go away until Trump goes away and people kind of revert back to what has been kind of normal politics, where you look at personal responsibility. You look at actually trying to collaborate to make progress on issues. So it's not something that's going to go away until Trump fades from the political.
I love Josh Hawley and his attempt this week to bring up a bill to get rid of Section 230. And the Senate were like, "Oh, isn't that cute of you? Just sit down. That's not how we do it. We don't debate anything. We don't look at new ideas. When leadership decides we'll do that, we'll tell you. But go ahead, Josh, and just sit down. You look at you. You're so cute." I really don't like Josh Hawley at all. I don't really have anything positive or funny to talk about. How we usually end with us watching something or doing something fun. This week was pretty unfun.
Yeah, it was. Did you watch A Long Way Up?
I'm sorry. No, I have not. I can't. I'm just not getting into anything TV like I used to. And I don't know why. I'm going to blame it on the pandemic.
What do we have to look forward to then here? Come on. Give us something good.
I started watching Big Sky. Have any of you guys seen that?
What's that?
So it's actually on the broadcast network. So ABC. It's a new series, and it takes place in Montana, and it has a cast of characters like in small town Montana. I'm trying to say how much without giving away. It's kind of like a thriller type suspenseful series. There's murder that happens like in the first episode, and then you're trying to piece back what's going on, and it involves a swath of the state. There's there's some criminal activity going on, underbelly, criminal underbelly activity.
Is it like Yellowstone?
Yes, in some ways it's like that. Yeah, the premise is that Montana is a big state and it's very spread out, and that there's a lot that's happening beneath the surface because of that, and because you can kind of get away with a lot. There's a former prosecutor who's involved in trying to unravel all of this, and she gets deep in it, and when then her life is at stake. It's
I just don't trust network TV anymore. They just haven't put anything quality out, I think, in so long.
This one's really fast paced, and then the season finale is next week, and it's only been about 5 episodes. So they've only had 5 episodes, and they're already at the season finale. It's coming back next season, but it was a quick.
I have a small rant on this topic. You guys asked last time how many services we each subscribe to or whatever. So I just added another one. We got HBO Max because there was a show on there we wanted to watch, and
what's the show?
The Undoing. With Nicole Kidman, which I'm only like 2 episodes in, so I can't tell you whether it's good or bad yet, but it's interesting. But I recall I used to have a subscription to HBO, and you put it on, and anything you found on there was great. The series were amazing. They had a really good selection of movies, etc. And now Warner Brothers bought them, and it's like they're trying to make it like Netflix. Like there's just tons of crap on there. If you buy HBO Max and you first go to the service, you don't even see any of these famous series that they're known for. Like that all stuff's just buried now, and it's like these B-rate movies. And anyway,
I do agree
this
with
one
that.
will be good. We'll see.
I miss like The Sopranos and Game of Thrones, that it was event television, and they didn't come out with them a lot. But when they did, you knew it was going to be really, really good.
Well, HBO used to be known for quality over quantity. And I think Warner Brothers is changing their focus with that, probably to their detriment, but we'll see.
So isn't Warner Brothers was the one that said their studio releases are just going to go to HBO Max for 2021?
Yeah. In fact, on Christmas, we'll get to watch Wonder Woman 1984 because it's going to be released simultaneously on HBO Max in the theater. So that is cool. And that's worth $15 right there, probably.
And I think Marvel.
That's what I want to see in the theater. Like like any of like the superhero movies. Those are the ones I want to see in the theater, like on the big screen and have that immersive experience.
Yeah, but are you going to go to a theater right now?
No.
Yeah,
Brandon's maybe. I don't know. He's hesitating there.
That's the thing. I don't know. I have been to the theater once since it reopened, and there was only one other person in the theater besides me, so I felt fine because we were at very opposite ends of the auditorium. So
you were more than 6 feet apart easily.
Yeah. And that was one thing. I haven't bought a theater ticket in the last like 4 or 5 years, like in person anyway. Like I'll do it through apps, so I'm able to see up till like the time the movie starts, like how many other people in the auditorium and all that.
Yeah, I hate you got to pick your seat now. That kind of sucks.
I'd like that though.
I like
being able to pick my seat.
Because if I can't get a good seat, I'll just go another time. If I know I've got one, then great.
I guess that's true. But two, I like it not having reserved seats. So if somebody sits by me that I'd get a bad vibe off of, I can just move.
That's true.
Because you're like, somebody sits down,
that does happen.
It's like you just look like a talker. If somebody sits down to me next to a movie and asks me a question, we immediately get up. Because like I am not sitting next to somebody asking questions the entire movie. Or this is a good one too, the person who brings in an entire bag of food with him and sits next to you eating some steamed no
they're going to be eating that the entire time you're trying to watch the movie.
I can one up you. Somebody last year when I was at the theater, I don't remember what movie, brought in Indian food, their own Indian food, and then the smell was so overwhelming. And I just
literally called the police.
Like what? And they had like the containers and they're taking out like several different containers. I'm like, what is this? Like,
I like Indian food, but I can't imagine trying to eat it in the aisle of a movie theater.
Oh yeah, I don't get that.
Theater. Bringing Indian food on a theater or Indian food on a plane should get you arrested and banned. That's what this country needs. You know what? Because that person's just thinking about themselves, not thinking about the people around them. That's where we got to start the change. One movie theater experience at a time.
Get rid of self.
And then it goes all the way up from there, right? I mean, it's it's about consideration for others, and it filters into every aspect.
Question, JP. Brandon, you go to more movies than JP and I combined, I'm going to guess.
Yeah.
Would you go to a movie if you had to put your cell phone in a container before you went into the theater?
That would make me more likely to go.
I would too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I don't use mine, and it bothers me to no end when I see other people pull them out and use them, and it just I would definitely do that because when I go to the theater, I don't want any distractions. I don't want anybody talking around me and making noise. I want a completely immersive experience where I can lose myself in that movie for 120 minutes and not think about anything else. That's what I want. That's why I go to the theater. And that's one of the aspects I like. I like watching movies at home, but there's also an aspect of if I'm at home, it's still easy to be distracted. There's other stimuli around me. There's other stuff going on.
It's a lot easier to take that text when you're at home on the couch than if you're actually sitting there in the experience.
All right. That's our hour. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.